Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Teresa Nelson, and I am legal counsel for the ACLU of Minnesota. We are funded and supported by over 8,500 members statewide. Our mission is to defend constitutional rights under the U.S. and Minnesota constitutions. Voting is a fundamental constitutional right. The right to vote is protected by more constitutional amendments, the 1st, 14th, 15th, 19th, 24th, and 26th amendments, than any other right we enjoy as Americans. A fundamental constitutional right cannot be taken away by a vote of the majority. Preventing voter fraud is certainly a compelling state interest. However, what is a minor requirement for a majority of people is a severe burden for a minority of people. Let me repeat that. What is a minor requirement for a majority of citizens is a severe burden for a minority of citizens who may be poor, elderly, or disabled and have a difficult time obtaining an identification card. If a voter ID bill were to become law, the fundamental right to vote would be defended in the courts. Lawsuits, win or lose, are going to be expensive. This is not a settled issue in Minnesota. While the Supreme Court upheld Indiana's voter ID law, Minnesota is not Indiana. First, the microscopic scrutiny of 2 election recounts in 2008 and 2010 have not led to a single conviction for voter impersonation fraud, which is the only type of voter fraud that photo ID requirements could possibly address. Indiana, in contrast, had a history of voter fraud. Second, Indiana does not have any federally recognized Indian tribes. Minnesota has 11. Voter ID requirements particularly affect Indian voters in 2 ways. First, the Minnesota Constitution guarantees the right to free exercise of religion, and along with other religions, many Indians have religious objections to identification cards bearing their photographs. Senate File 509 does not have an exemption for religious objections. Furthermore, there is a federal consent decree that protects Indian voters who register to vote with a tribal ID, which contains a picture but not address. On its face, Senate File 509 violates that consent decree. There was a time in Minnesota's history when we denied Indians the right to vote unless they could prove that they, quote, had adopted the habits and customs of civilization. And it would be shameful if we denied Indians the right to vote now. Finally, the bills currently before your committee will also have to pass muster under the Minnesota Constitution. Our Constitution contains protections greater than that provided by the United States Constitution. An oath is sufficient to ensure voter eligibility under the Minnesota Constitution, and we do not require photo ID for the exercise of other fundamental rights, like the right to religious worship, testifying before a legislative committee, or publishing a blog. Voter ID is costly, it harms a fundamental right, and there is no measure of its need or effectiveness. We respectfully urge you to oppose voter ID. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, members? Senator Chamberlain.
I'm sorry. You said you referenced the Minnesota Constitution. Doesn't the Minnesota Constitution, U.S. law somewhere also state they had to be U.S. citizens and of a certain age? How would you address that?
Mr. Chair, Senator Chamberlain, yes, the U.S. Constitution does, and the Minnesota Constitution both prescribe eligibility. But I would direct you to Article 7, Section 3 of our Constitution, which directs the legislature to provide for a uniform oath or affirmation to be administered at elections. And so they've got to be read in conjunction. You can't pick and choose provisions from the full elective franchise section of the Constitution.
Okay.